guys, welcome to Pro Force Education. We're going to start doing weekly podcast for you guys with different guests. Today's guest is, you may know him, Josh McDaniel, our program manager for our Milford location here. So one of the things we're going to do is just kind of use this format so you guys can get to know our coaches better, and then also just discuss kind of hot topics in the trends of athletic performance or fitness or overall health. So question I'm going to start out with today for Josh, just so you guys know a little bit more about him, is Josh, why don't you tell everybody where you went to school?
So I'm a Cincinnati native. I graduated from Turpin High School. I know high school is a big thing for everybody in Cincinnati. So Turpin High School grad, went to Capital University, started out there. I played soccer there for 2 seasons, was there for a year and a half before I transferred to Ohio State. I finished out my undergrad in exercise science at Ohio State, and then I am now in my graduate school with UC, getting my master's degree in sports administration.
Great. So a lot of you may know is a lot of our soccer players work with Josh, and now you know Josh has a background in playing soccer. Did you mention Ohio State, how you played soccer with their...
Oh, yeah. At Ohio State, I played mainly with the club team, but I also had the opportunity to play with the varsity team as well, and that's kind of where I was introduced to the whole strength and conditioning side.
Yeah, and you played with Cup growing up, right?
Yeah, I played with Cup. I was a Cup player from my sophomore year of high school through my high school career.
Yeah. So I think one of the big questions that our clients have, all right, is why do you always wear a hat?
I wear a hat because if I didn't, I would have to do a lot of stuff to make sure my hair stays in the right spot and doesn't get all messed up. And my hair sits just pinned straight, either up or down, depending on how long it is, and I don't like dealing with it, so I just wear a hat. It's easier.
Fair enough. So what kind of got you interested in, I know you said a lot of your interest in strength and conditioning kind of stemmed from your time at Ohio State, but I know when I first met you, when you applied for the internship, you were kind of on the fence as far as like, do I go down the physical therapy route? Do I stay rehab based, or do I get into strength and conditioning, more exercise science stuff? So what kind of made you want to coach and be a strength coach?
So when I started looking for places to have an internship for my final semester at Ohio State, there were a lot of different options that I looked into. Obviously, physical therapy was a big one because that's a really big field that a lot of people who study exercise science end up going into. I worked at a physical therapy clinic when I was at Ohio State, and I was on the outpatient neuro rehab side of physical therapy. So it's one of, I want to say 3 to 5 facilities in the U.S. that have this type of rehab, but it's the Neuro Recovery Network. So we would bring people in who had spinal cord injuries, and we would harness them to a treadmill, and we would walk their feet on the treadmill for them, just so that kind of they could regain some of that neuro pathway a little bit. That was the idea behind it. And it was mainly a research-based physical therapy clinic. As I kind of phased out of that and left, they started to work in some new research that they had come about with like STEM units and stuff like that. But that showed me that it was going to be hard to stay in a sports setting. So, and you also have to go for 3 years of school after that for physical therapy doctorate. So that kind of went by the side. I pushed that away when I was looking at my internship, just because I had worked in it. It wasn't the setting for me. I didn't want to be in a clinical setting. My big thing was I wanted to stay active in sports. So strength and conditioning ended up being the biggest way to do that. Another field that I looked into was just going into like straight up research, and I would have loved to have had an internship working in like a Nike lab or a Gatorade lab with their athletes, testing their products on the athletes. That was another thing I looked into. That's just really hard to find an internship with, honestly. That's mainly your people with master's degrees or doctorates who are doing that. So strength conditioning was the next best thing, and coaching was the next best thing that I could really look into to kind of maintain that relationship with sports that I really wanted to have. in a non-clinical setting.
Nice. Now, what would you, being a former soccer player, right? I know we have this discussion all the time, is what advice would you give to soccer players out there, or even yourself in high school, right? That why they should focus on not only the skill aspect of the game, which I think is technical and they spend a lot of time on, especially with their teams, but why is it important to get in the gym and focus on the holistic picture of your athletic development versus just being so heavy on the tactical and the skill portion?
Well, there's a bunch of different reasons. I think some of the big ones for me is if you look at people who are at the next level, a lot of it is skill, but it's also athletic development. Those people have been able to get into the gym. They've been able to develop themselves athletically so that when they get to the field, they have that advantage over somebody who's probably done the same amount of skill training as they have. Another thing is injury prevention. So when I was in high school and when I got into college, my first couple of years, and even at the end of my career, I was plagued with injuries, just minor muscle strains, twisted ankles. I mean, anything you can think of that a soccer player would have, I had it. And strength training and movement training, movement patterning, all that stuff helps fix those issues, especially in a sport that has a lot of those common injuries like the hamstring strains and the ankle twists and all that basic stuff. I think strength training, when I got into it in college, really helped me kind of realize where my deficits were. Because when I got to college at Ohio State, and I hadn't strength trained really at all, when I played with the varsity team with guys who had strength trained before, there was a big difference in little things. Like my 10-yard sprint was almost 0.2 of a second slower than everybody else. My 40 was a lot slower. And those are not necessarily numbers that are important to soccer, but they're important to athletics. And if you can increase those measures, then you know you're increasing your athleticism. So for me, those are all kind of the little things that strength training it really affected when I was playing soccer. It's one thing I really try to harp on with my soccer players, because a lot of soccer players, like you said, Kev, are worried more about their skills training, and I think that's very important. But I also think in a sport like soccer, where you're playing nonstop year-round, you got to be able to stay healthy. The healthier people are the ones who are going to be able to progress. So those are two big things, that staying healthy and that athletic advantage are probably the biggest things I try to pass on to the soccer athletes that I train now.
Yeah, and I think the second piece of it that I wanted to bring up is far too often we'll look at a team's plan because they say they do speed development or they do that side of the skills in practice, and then you watch from afar, and it's really just throwing out an agility ladder or having some cone drills, right? What would you kind of say from your experience, right, as being a soccer player and coming up through the programs and so forth, the difference between like an actual like movement-based program that's going to teach you the fundamentals of acceleration, top end speed, change of direction, how important is that versus just doing footwork-oriented stuff where you're learning a drill or you're just learning patterns through an agility ladder, and kind of take people through what the difference is between those? Because I think a lot of times what I see at a soccer practice or even within our facility is we'll see coaches kind of throw out the agility ladder and they're like, oh yeah, we're doing speed training. Well, it's an agility ladder, and I think from your experience being able to be on the pitch, like what's the difference?
Well, I think you kind of set it out right there. It's just when you do the like little foot drills, when you do the agility ladder, how often are you going to be moving like that in a game? Not often, if at all. I mean, maybe a couple times a game, and that's with the ball at your feet. Maybe shuffle here and there a couple steps, but what you're really doing in a game is accelerating, slowing down, changing direction. So those are the important things to focus on. I mean, I don't know how or when or why agility ladders got so big and why so many people like them. I can understand it from maybe a little bit of like a conditioning or like warm-up standpoint, or a plyo standpoint. You can use them for plyometrics, but from a strict speed standpoint, it's not really going to help you increase your acceleration. It's not going to help you with your top end speed form. It's not going to help you change your direction. You're not really planning hard and slowing yourself down. It's not going to work on deceleration, which is a very, very big piece that a lot of performance trainers in general miss. It's always talking about speeding up. Well, at some point you got to slow down and say change direction. That's where a lot of injuries come from, not being able to slow down. So I think those are the biggest pieces that are the difference between just the footwork agility ladder thing versus like a full-on speed session where you're learning the proper angles to produce force, where you're learning the proper way to produce angles to slow down, where you're learning the proper angles to change direction, how to plant. Those are probably the biggest things, the biggest differences between those two.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought up that, because that was my next really piece I was going to bring up, is the deceleration portion. Because we all know if you look at any sport, like 90% of injuries happen when somebody's slowing down and going to change directions. And you see it all the time in here when we go to do the movements that require an athlete to deceleration or change directions. They often miss the patterning that has to occur and the angles that have to occur to properly decelerate. And that's why we're getting so many injuries, especially in soccer. It's why ACLs are so prevalent in soccer. It's why meniscal tears are so prevalent in soccer. What I know, when Josh was an intern for us, his project was over ankles, and how quick and easy ways we can strengthen ankles. And just real quick, kind of explain why you chose the ankle for that project, just bringing that up. And because I know it has some inherent importance when we're looking at soccer performance. Because I know, for me, I hear about ankles in soccer, I hear about volleyball all the time. So I didn't know if you wanted to touch on that real quick.
Well, I chose the ankle because we didn't really have any ankle strengthening or ankle rehab protocol at the time. And that was a big issue that we had, not just with our soccer athletes, but with a lot of our athletes who were coming in and saying, hey, I sprained an ankle here. Hey, it feels a little weird there when I do this. So that was something that I wanted to focus on a little bit. I think a lot of issues with soccer players is that, once they have the ankle sprain, it starts from the ankle not being strengthened. And then once they get it strengthened back, they might lose a little bit of range of motion. So now they're in an even worse position, but they go back because they feel better. So now they're playing on a weak ankle that doesn't have mobility, and then they re-injure it again. It's just a continuation of that cycle. So that's why I wanted to focus on the ankle, because it's such a big piece to your athletic movement. And really a lot of athletic movement starts at the foot and it goes up. So the ankle is probably one of the most important pieces to being able to squat, to hinge, to jump, to run. All of those things are extremely important in soccer, and especially like slowing down, decelerating, cutting. You got to be able to produce those angles, and if you have tight ankles or weak ankles or anything like that, you're not going to be able to do that with as much efficiency as possible. So that was the reason why I focused on the ankle with that, and why I tried to kind of build that protocol for our ankle strengthening, ankle mobility, ankle flexibility. So one thing that I like to do the most with our soccer players is kind of proprioceptive work. I think that trains the ankle a lot. I think just forcing, and it also trains the knee and the hip as well. So it kind of hits all three together, which is what you're looking for when you have a certain amount of time in a session. So proprioceptive work is a big one for us. We like to do a lot of balance work for our ankle strengthening and our ankle mobility. We do a lot of kind of band four-way ankle exercises. We do a lot of ankle stretching for sure. And one thing I like to do is when we go through our FMS and we screen somebody and we can see that they have tight ankles, I always like to ask them if they feel a pinch in the front of their ankle or if they feel tightness in the back of their ankle. So typically if they feel a pinch in the front of the ankle, it means they're not gliding properly at that joint, at that talus and fibula joint, or tibia joint, sorry. So that's more of like a banded distraction that we need to do with them to help those joints glide properly. If they feel it on the back, it means they have Achilles or calf tightness. So that's where we kind of differentiate between which protocol we take them through to help them out with that mobility, and then we do strengthening on top of that.
Good. Great answer. And I think one question that I forgot I wanted to ask you at the beginning when we were going through some background is there a struggle you've been through in athletics that you might be able to share with everybody, and kind of how you got through that struggle? Because I know a lot of our athletes that we get in here are ones that come in through kind of a return to care model where they've either had surgery or they're dealing with chronic injuries. And I didn't know if you've been through anything like that. It's not something I've ever asked you. And if you'd be willing to share that story and how you got through that mentally and physically. So
yeah, definitely. I have had knee surgery before. I had it my freshman year of high school. So I had OCD in my left knee, not the kind of OCD that you'd normally think of. It's osteochondritis dissecans. So basically what happened, and this is very common in sports where you're cutting a lot. So soccer and basketball are the two primary sports that you see this in. At least at the time, that's what my doctor said. I haven't looked up any research about it in a while. It's been 8 years, 9 years. So there could have been more research come out about it. But at the time, it was prevalent in soccer and basketball. And it's basically you're cutting so much that your joints are rubbing against each other. And the blood vessels at the bottom of my femur had died off because of all the cutting. So then the bone started to chip away because it wasn't getting any nutrients from the blood. So obviously, you're not going to be able to run or cut or do anything athletic with a bone chip in your knee right at the bottom of your joint. So I had surgery on that. They had to take, it was either bone fragment or bone marrow from my hip. I couldn't remember which one it is. And they injected that into my knee to kind of remold, and help the blood vessels regrow. And that's a long process. It's bone, so it's going to take a little bit longer to, it's new bone, so it's going to take a little bit longer to regenerate properly after it's been molded. And it's also waiting to make sure that the blood vessels grow back so that you can get the proper nutrients so that it doesn't just die off again. And mine's more of a condition than it is an injury. Mine came out because of an injury, so I collided with a keeper in one of the games, and I think that's when it chipped, but it had probably been there for a while before, and it just hadn't shown itself yet. So I was actually fortunate. I was only out for 9 months. Usually if you have that injury, you're out for a year plus, waiting for everything to grow back properly, and I've known people that had to wait for a year with that injury. So and it's common with ACLs too. You're out for about that 9 months ish, depending on how bad the ACL tear is. So as far as that goes, I mean, that's probably the most frustrated I've ever been in my athletic career, because I was going into high school. I had a really good chance to make a good varsity team my senior year for a high school group. My club team was doing really well, and I was one of the leaders on the club team at that point in time. So it was really difficult for me to go to every practice and to go to every game and sit on the sidelines and then go to rehab and not even be able to like bend my knee like that. That mentally as a freshman in high school is so difficult. Like that is one of the worst things that can happen to somebody that young. It's kind of like that's the thing where you just have to lean on like your family, you have to lean on your therapist. Like take every single outlet that you have, and like don't be afraid to reach out to them and say like, hey, this is what I'm going through. This is really frustrating me. Like those people will listen to you. Like they're going to be able to, if they know you well enough, they're going to be able to see that you're frustrated. And I think that's what, good coaches are for. They're there for you for kind of that person to lean on when you need it, especially something as long-winded as 9 months to a year can be without any sort of athletic participation. It's frustrating. I understand that completely.
Yeah, that is hard. And then the very last question I want to ask you is there any common, it might take you a second to think of it here, but is there any common question? I know you're one of the people, along with myself, that'll do the intake evaluations here. Is there any common question that you can think of that you could take the time to answer now for the parents that are listening to this, of the athletes that we get during the initial intake eval?
One that I get a lot is with our younger athletes, and it's not so much a question, more of a statement. Like, I think my kid's too young to be lifting weights. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. I think one's it's a misconception of what they know and what they've seen online about bodybuilding, heavy weights every single day, as many reps as possible to failure. Everybody's sore all the time. I think the other thing is just they've heard that for somebody who's developing at that age, it can hurt like growth plates, or it can stunt growth, or it can actually have a negative effect versus a positive effect. And the main thing I always tell them is, one, we're not a powerlifting or a bodybuilding gym. We're an athletic performance gym, so we're not here to make them a better lifter. We're here to make them a better athlete, and this is one way we do that. We're never going to give them anything that they can't handle, and we're never going to not watch them, especially as brand new athletes at like a 8 to 12 year old range, really. And even with our high school group, if they come in and they don't have a training age, we're going to watch them closely too, because they're going to think that they can hang with the other high schoolers who have been with us for 3 to 4 years, when in all reality they should be doing a kettlebell deadlift. So I think us having that coaching experience and having our coach to athlete ratio is a big thing that I talk to them about when that kind of issue comes up. And the other thing is, there are plenty of studies that show that lifting weights, as long as it's done properly, especially for that age, will not stunt growth. It won't hurt the athlete in any way, and that's something that a lot of parents like to hear. It's something that makes them a little bit more comfortable when they come in, just to know that we're going to have eyes on their kid and that we're not going to hurt them. We're only here to help them and make them a better athlete. So I would say that's probably the biggest one that I get a lot.
Yeah, that's one of the big ones that I get as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a matter of just know that we have the best interest of everybody in mind, and we've taken the time to write progressions and regressions for everything, and do stuff in a safe environment and manner, and that's why we've been successful at what we do. Mm-hmm. So Josh, appreciate you for carving out some time to be on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
No problem. I'll probably see you around. But yeah, guys, if you have any further questions for Josh, his contact info is on the website, so feel free to reach out. We kind of lean on him, as I mentioned, for kind of soccer-specific stuff, and he heads up a lot of our team training for soccer. So if you're interested, feel free to reach out. He's also, we can do remote stuff. So if you're listening to this over in Spain, we can help you out, or wherever you are. So yeah, thanks, Josh, and we'll catch up with you guys soon. Thanks.
Thank you.